Desmond's shoulder slams into the office door, and the frame gives with a sharp crack. Stale, refrigerated air rushes out, smelling of antiseptic and something metallic. His phone is already in his hand, thumb hovering over 911. The glow from inside flickers, catching on rows of metal and a narrow bed pushed against the wall. He whispers to no one, "I can't unsee this." That door was never open, not in the 3 years he'd cleaned this floor. Management always said the same thing: storage, do not enter. Last week, they'd even installed a new lock. Most nights, Desmond could walk the building with his eyes half closed and never miss a trash can. The rhythm was everything. Start in the lobby at 10, ride the elevator to 12, work his way down. Vacuum lines straight as rails, bins emptied in the same order, restrooms checked twice. In a world that rarely noticed him, the routine was his proof that he still had control over something. That's why the 6th floor door bothered him. It broke the pattern. Every hallway on that floor opened cleanly with his badge. Marketing, legal, conference rooms with glass walls, still smudged from late meetings. But halfway down the north corridor, there was one matte gray door with no nameplate, just a thin black reader and a tiny red light that never turned green for him. The first week after the new lock went in, he chalked it up to a tenant change. Companies shifted teams all the time. Some exec needed privacy. Some consultant needed a temporary office. Not his business. But the building spoke to him in small ways. Most people heard air vents and background noise. Desmond heard when something in that noise changed. It started as a vibration, a low, almost subsonic hum that seemed to nestle in the walls around the locked door. Not loud enough to be obvious, but there, steady, like a distant generator. He noticed it one Tuesday close to midnight, when the rest of the floor was quiet. He just tied off a trash bag from the break room when he felt it in his elbow, the way old injuries sometimes pick up tiny tremors. He paused, set the bag down, and walked back toward the gray door. The hum got stronger as he approached, a low thrum under his feet, under the painted drywall. He held his badge up to the reader anyway. The light blinked red. Access denied. He shrugged it off that night. Equipment room, maybe. HVAC. The building was old enough that nothing surprised him. But then there was the smell. At first it was faint, hovering at the edge of his awareness when he pushed his cart past the door. A chemical sweetness, like hospital disinfectant mixed with something sugary. Over days it sharpened. Not rotten, not exactly medical waste, but treated, controlled. Artificial. He knew the normal scents of the building: stale coffee, reheated takeout, printer toner, the ghost of cologne that clung to the executive wing. This was none of those. He watched the air, too. At the bottom of every door on that floor, the dust traced neat little lines. Drafts pushed patterns. Under the gray door, the dust never settled. Some nights, when the AC cycled off, he could feel a cold slip of air slide out around the jamb, like the room behind it was refrigerated. He mentioned the lock casually the first time. Just a question to his supervisor while they checked off supplies in the basement closet. "What's in 6 North?" he asked. "Door by the copy room. My badge don't work." His supervisor barely looked up from the clipboard. "Storage, vendor stuff. We're not servicing it. Don't worry about it." The answer was too quick, too ready. Desmond filed it away. A few nights later, his floor machine snagged on a small cardboard box tucked behind a recycling bin near that same door. The label had slipped sideways, but he could still read the print. Archival media sensitive. No company logo, no department name, just a barcode and an address matching his building. He wheeled the box to the nearest lit office and asked the 2 names still glowing on the door frames if it belonged to them. Both shook their heads. He tried the mailroom on the 3rd floor. They scanned the barcode, frowned, and shrugged. "Probably misdelivered," the clerk said. "Leave it at the supervisor's station. We'll figure it out." By the next night, the box was gone. There was no record of a pickup in the log he passed every shift. Then came the email. It hit his inbox and every other staff account at 9:02 p.m., 10 minutes into his shift. Reminder: certain areas of the building are designated restricted. Do not attempt access unless specifically authorized. Failure to comply may result in disciplinary action. No list of which areas, no explanation, Just a line about new security protocols and tenant privacy. The thing about cleaning buildings is you learn what people try to hide. Affairs that start in conference rooms, bottles left in bottom drawers, stress tears wiped with bathroom paper towels. Desmond had cleaned enough to know that spaces lie too. Walls painted fresh to cover mold. Cables rerouted to hide where power really flowed. Doors labeled storage that never saw a broom. And now, this door with a new lock, a cold breath, and a hum that didn't belong. While that was happening on 6, something else started on 7. One night, as he pushed his cart off the elevator, the lights in the corridor flickered once, twice, and then died, leaving only the faint glow of exit signs. The building was changing its story, and he felt it. The first time the pattern showed itself, it was almost an accident. 2 weeks after the email, Desmond lingered on 6 a little longer than usual. His back was tight, so he sat on his cart's edge near the stairwell, scrolling through music on his phone. The floor was empty, the kind of quiet where every click echoed. That was when he noticed the hum. He glanced at the clock on the wall by the copy room. 2:17 a.m. At that exact moment, the vibration under his feet deepened. The sound he'd heard in passing, a low mechanical thrum, rose just enough to press against his chest. The exit sign above the stairwell buzzed, its green glow flickering like it was struggling for power. He sat there, listening, counting his breaths. At 2:23, the hum faded. The air relaxed. The exit sign steadied. The next night, curiosity brought him back to the same spot at almost the same time. He paced his work differently, slowed down linen restocks, took an extra minute wiping fingerprints from the elevator buttons. At 2:16 a.m., he was back at the intersection by the locked door. Right on cue, the floor trembled lightly. The hum rose, not loud, but insistent. This time, he stepped closer to the gray door and pressed his palm to the wall beside it. The drywall vibrated, a steady, artificial heartbeat. He looked at his phone. 2:17 a.m. He stood there for 6 minutes. At 2:23, the vibration dropped away again, like someone flipping a switch. The air blew cooler from under the door, then settled back into the building's normal climate. Once, he could dismiss as coincidence. Twice, made him suspicious. 3 times, turned it into a pattern. Over the next week, he tested it. Different nights, different routes. No matter what, if he was near 6 North around 2:17 a.m., the hum came. 6 minutes on, then quiet. He started jotting notes in the back of his pocket notebook, the one he usually reserved for supply counts and overtime hours. 2:17 through 2:23. Low hum, cold air, exit sign flicker. He underlined the time 3 times. Down in the basement, the head of maintenance joked once that the building was like an old man. Its bones creaked when storms rolled in. Desmond knew every rattle of those bones, but this wasn't weather. This was scheduled. He found a building systems map tacked to the wall near the janitor's locker room. Faded print, plastic sleeve, circuits drawn like veins. His finger traced the line for the 6th floor north wing. The locked room shared a circuit with 3 things: the corridor lights, the elevator call panel, and a power feed labeled only with a number and the word aux. Auxiliary. He'd never heard anyone mention an auxiliary system on that floor. 3 nights later, the building gave him another clue. He was buffing the 7th floor hallway just above 6 North when the lights dimmed without warning. The machine faltered, then came back as emergency power kicked in. For a few seconds, the fluorescent panels overhead flickered like a heartbeat out of rhythm. He glanced at his watch. 2:17 a.m. He let the machine idle and walked to the window at the end of the corridor. Across the glass, he could see the faint reflection of the building's internal lights cycling, like something was drawing power impulses. By 2:23, everything was normal again. So whatever lived behind that gray door didn't just hum. It pulled on the building's veins. One night, he took a different route, just to test the edges. He stayed on 4 until well past 2, wiping down stair rails that didn't need it. On his way up, he stopped the elevator between floors by pressing the emergency stop, held his breath, and listened. The car shuddered slightly, then paused. In that stillness, he heard the faint whine of power somewhere above. deep and contained. His skin prickled. He released the stop. The elevator lurched and continued to 6. The doors opened on an empty corridor. The hum was already fading. The wall clock near the gray door read 2:22 a.m. Soon, it wasn't just sound. One Thursday, the security guard on duty mentioned a glitch when Desmond signed in. "Cameras cut out for a few minutes last night," the guard said, tapping the desk monitor. "6th floor, north side. IT says it's a power spike. You see anything?" Desmond felt his heartbeat tick up. "What time?" he asked. The guard clicked through a log. 2:17 to 2:23. Exact. That's precise for a glitch, huh? "Yeah," Desmond said softly. "Precise." Later that night, when the cameras should have been rolling, Desmond walked the corridor with his cart, knowing he was passing through a blind spot. At 2:17, the hum rose like always. The exit sign flickered. Somewhere above him, there was a subtle shift in the elevator shaft. He called the car, then stepped back when the doors opened with no one inside. He watched the panel. Every floor button was dark. Still, the car had stopped here, exactly during the blackout window. He stepped inside and studied the security camera bubble in the corner. A tiny red light that usually blinked to show recording status was dark. The door stayed open for an unusually long stretch, 40 seconds. Long enough for someone to move unseen. Long enough for someone to be moved unseen. When the doors finally slid shut again, he stepped back into the empty hallway and looked at the gray door. Near the base of the frame, half hidden by its own mop streaks, lay a discarded lanyard. He picked it up carefully. No photo badge, no name, just a cleaned-off RFID sticker where an ID should have been. It was still warm from the building's air, but it felt like something stripped of identity. The next day, on a hunch, he checked the digital badge logs on the shared computer in the service office. It was basic access, timestamps, door IDs, anonymous codes. He scrolled to 2:17 a.m., 6 North Door. The entries were there. Every night, one line at 2:17, another at 2:23, both tagged with the same card number. No name attached. Where a name should have been, the field was blank. He followed the card number backward through the week. It appeared nowhere else in the building. No lobby entry, no elevator call, no bathroom access. Just that one door. A ghost credential. He frowned. Every employee, every contractor, even delivery drivers left traces. Cards pinged the lobby, the elevators, the stairwell. Whoever this was, the system only admitted they existed when that gray door opened and closed. He dug deeper, checking closed maintenance tickets for the wing. Most were normal. Light replacements, thermostat complaints, a jammed copier. One stood out. 3 weeks earlier, there had been a ticket for door reader intermittent, 6 North. It was marked completed by a technician whose name Desmond didn't recognize. He checked the HR directory. No match. No contractor entry either. Someone who didn't exist had fixed the reader on the door nobody was supposed to open for a badge that belonged to no one. During 6-minute windows where cameras went dark and power dipped. He stared at the screen, the air in the service room suddenly too thin. If he was right, someone was using his building for something that didn't want to be seen. And then, one night, the smell outside the gray door changed. It wasn't just chemical anymore. Under the antiseptic sweetness, something softer threaded through, a trace of sweat, of human breath that had nowhere else to go. That was when the pattern stopped being an abstract puzzle and started feeling like a warning. The cough came on a Wednesday. It was late, even for him, almost 3 a.m. He'd stayed behind on 6 to re-wax a stretch of hallway that always scuffed faster than the rest. His floor machine hummed as it moved, but when he cut the power to reposition the cord, the corridor fell into a dense, padded quiet. That's when he heard it. A short, rough cough. Muffled, but close. Not through the ceiling. Not echoing from the stairwell. It came from the other side of the gray door. He froze where he stood, one hand still on the machine handle. For a second, he told himself it could be the pipes. A shift in pressure. Something mechanical, clearing. But he'd learned the building's language. Pipes groaned. Vents whistled. This sounded like a throat trying not to make noise. He walked slowly toward the door, every step louder than it needed to be. The red light on the reader stared back, unblinking.
"Hello?" he said quietly. No answer.
He held his breath, leaning in until his ear almost brushed the cold metal. For a moment, there was only the hum, lower tonight, almost reluctant. Then the cough came again, softer, as if bitten back.
It wasn't his imagination.
He stayed there longer than he'd like to admit, listening, waiting for anything else. A shuffle, a voice, the scrape of a chair. Nothing came. Eventually, he backed away, finished the floor, and told himself it would be gone by the time he returned. The next night, the door was different. As he rounded the corner, he noticed it immediately. The sweep of his mop had left faint streaks along the base the night before. Now, right at the threshold, the streak broke. A thin line of moisture had seeped out and dried, dragging dust with it. Something had moved on the other side. When he pushed his cart past, something slid under the door. It was so subtle he almost missed it. A tiny rectangle of paper, pushed by hesitant fingers. It stopped where the corridor light fell on it. He stared at it for a long beat, then set the brake on his cart and crouched down. It was a torn scrap of notebook page. On it, in cramped, uneven handwriting, was a single word: water. The letters were shaky, pressed hard enough to dent the paper. The kind of writing that happens when your hand doesn't quite trust its own strength. His first reaction was denial. It could be a prank, someone inside messing with the janitor on night shift. But the memory of that cough sat heavy in his chest. He straightened up and glanced at the cameras, knowing from his own notes that for another few minutes, this section of the hallway would be a blind spot. His throat felt dry. He reached into his cart, grabbed an unopened bottle from the pack he kept for long nights, and set it on the floor. He nudged it toward the gap with the toe of his shoe until the cap touched the threshold. For a second, nothing happened. Then the bottle tilted, slid forward, and disappeared. The movement was small, but there was no mistaking it. Someone had taken it. Whoever was inside had waited, watching, hand ready at the crack. That night, the hum never came. The 217 vibration didn't rise. The exit sign stayed steady. The 6-minute window passed like any other patch of time. Downstairs in the tiny break room, he sat at the corner table and brought up the internal camera feeds on the old monitor near the microwave. He scrubbed back through the footage to the moment the note appeared. The angle on that corridor was wide but shallow, more for showing movement than detail. Still, as he watched himself walk past, he saw it. A shadow that shouldn't have been there. Just before the scrap of paper slid out, a darker patch interrupted the thin line of light at the bottom of the door. Not a trick of the camera. Something solid, shifting its weight, careful not to be seen. A knee, maybe. A shoulder. A body pressed close to listen. He replayed the clip 3 times. The more he watched, the more his stomach turned. Not from fear exactly, but from the realization that he wasn't dealing with a malfunctioning server room or a secret storage closet. There was a person behind that door. Maybe alone. Maybe not. He closed the feed and stared at his reflection in the dark monitor. If he reported it, he knew how it might go. Management would circle the wagons. Security would insist everything was under control. Lawyers might show up with words like confidential and authorized personnel only. And the person behind that door, the one coughing, the one scribbling water on a torn page, might pay the price. If he stayed silent, though, he'd be complicit in whatever this was. Sleep would keep its distance. Every time he walked past that door, the word on that scrap would follow him. He needed context, a reason, something to tell him if this was a situation where speaking up would protect someone or expose them. The next afternoon, before his shift, he stopped by the front desk where the day receptionist sat behind a vase of constantly dying flowers. He leaned on the counter, casual. "Hey, quick question," he said. "We get a new tenant on 6, North Corridor?" She hesitated just a little too long. "Why?" "Just saw the new lock," he said. "Wanted to know what to put on the room list." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "It's a sublease, short term, legal stuff. You don't need to worry about it." "Legal like storage?" he asked. "Or legal like lawyers?" Her fingers tightened on the pen she was holding. "Desmond, it's above our pay grade. They told us to route all questions to management, so don't ask, okay?
The way she said it told him she'd already asked once and hadn't liked the answer.
He walked away with more questions than he'd brought.
That night, he added a new section to his notebook. Not just times and power dips now, but human signs. The cough, the note, the missing hum, the shadow under the door. The patterns he'd mapped in circuits and timestamps had a heartbeat now. And somewhere behind that gray paint and soundproofed wall, that heartbeat was getting weaker. For days after that note, Desmond moved through the building like someone listening for an echo only he could hear. He still emptied bins, still wiped counters, still signed the same timesheets. On paper, nothing had changed. Inside, everything had tilted. The locked door wasn't just an irritation now. It was a promise he hadn't decided how to keep. It wasn't the first time a quiet corner of a building had asked something of him. Years earlier, at another job in a different glass tower, there'd been a storage room in the sub-basement that never aired out. The concrete sweated in the summer, and the smell of solvent clung to his clothes when he left. Boxes stacked to the ceiling, labels half peeled, no one willing to say what was inside. He'd noticed the headaches first, a scratch at the back of his throat, the way the younger guy on his crew would come out of that room rubbing his eyes, nose running. He'd mentioned it once, lightly, to a supervisor. Feels strong in there. Maybe the vent's blocked. A week later, he filed a formal report. The headaches were getting worse, and he'd seen the word flammable too many times on boxes shoved against exposed wiring. The company responded with a walkthrough and polite words about appreciating his diligence. 3 weeks after that, his hours were cut. Overtime disappeared. He stopped getting called in for special projects where tips made the difference on his rent. No one said it was because he'd spoken up. They didn't have to. The message slipped in with the schedule changes and the way managers stopped making eye contact. He'd held out as long as he could, then moved on. New badge, new building, same mop. But he'd carried a quiet rule with him into this job. If he ever saw something that put somebody in danger, he'd speak, even if it cost him. It was one thing to repeat that to yourself in theory. It was another to stand in front of a door with a plea for water in your pocket. Back in his small apartment, the notebook he kept for work sat open on the table. Alongside the supply tallies, he'd started a second column. Times, smells, patterns. The note itself folded flat and taped to a page. He wasn't a detective. He knew that. But he also knew that stories got twisted once they left the mouths of people who'd actually seen what happened. His notes were a way of pinning the truth down before anyone could move it. The entries stretched back weeks now. Hum, 217 through 223. Power dip, 7th floor. Camera outage, guard confirmed. Unknown tech on ticket. Note, water. The list looked like a ledger, not of money, but of choices. The thing about walking into a hidden corridor is that every step narrows your options. When he'd first noticed the hum, he could have ignored it. When the email went out, he could have treated it like background noise. When the note slid under the door, he could have kicked it aside and told himself he'd never seen it. He hadn't. Each time, he'd walked a little farther down that unseen hallway. Now, turning back didn't mean going back to normal. It meant knowing and pretending he didn't. Carrying that silence into every shift, hearing a cough in his sleep, wondering if one night, the note would be a different word. Help! Please! Too late. He wasn't ready to blow a whistle on a mystery. Not yet. Too many variables. Too much room for someone to claim he was mistaken, exaggerating, stirring trouble again. So he made a different decision. He'd gather proof. Not gossip, not gut feelings. Screenshots, photos, logs. Enough that if he went to someone outside the building, someone who couldn't be leaned on, there'd be something they could hold in their hands. Not to expose the invisible person behind that door, but to protect them. He looked at the notebook one more time, then slipped it into his bag with his badge and keys. If the building wanted to keep secrets, it had picked the wrong janitor. The storm rolled in on a Thursday, the kind of summer thunder that makes old windows rattle in their frames. By midnight, rain slapped the glass stairwell, and the city outside was a smear of lights and water. Inside, the building felt hollowed out. Most tenants had left early. Security was down to one guard watching weather alerts between camera feeds. On 6, Desmond pushed his cart a little faster than usual. Storm nights meant leaks, and leaks meant extra paperwork. He checked ceiling tiles, scanned for stains, listened for drips. At 1:58 a.m., the corridor lights flickered once, then steadied. At 2:03, his phone buzzed with a system notification he wasn't supposed to get. A generic alert forwarded from maintenance. Backup generator cycling. Non-essential circuits temporarily offline. Expect intermittent resets. He glanced toward the gray door. If there was ever going to be a moment when the building loosened its grip, it would be now. He finished the last trash bin on the floor, then parked his cart in the stairwell where it would be out of camera view, at least for a few minutes. The rain hammered against the glass behind him, each drop a small drum beat. He checked his notebook. Next to aux circuit, he'd drawn a small star and the words, "Storm equals failure." His universal keys hung on his belt, the same ring he'd used 100 times to open vacuum closets, storage cages, and electrical rooms. One key in particular, a slender brass one, was meant for mechanical overrides on old locks. The new badge reader on 6 North wasn't supposed to respond to it. But tonight, nothing in the building was behaving exactly like it was supposed to. He walked back down the corridor, heartbeat syncing with the low rumble of thunder. As he got closer, he noticed the hum was off, present, but shaky, like a machine catching its breath. At 2:16, the exit sign buzzed, then went dark. The overhead lights blinked twice and cut out, plunging the hallway into a gray dimness lit only by the emergency strips along the floor. Emergency power had kicked in, but not cleanly. The badge reader on the gray door glowed a faint, uncertain red. He wiped his palm on his pants, then pressed his badge against it, out of habit. Red. Denied. He slid the brass key from his ring and knelt, feeling along the underside of the reader housing until his fingers found a small, recessed slot. Almost invisible, unless you knew to look. He'd seen that design once before, on a door that hadn't been updated correctly after a system upgrade. It was a manual override, left in place for engineers who didn't trust software. He slid the key in. For a second, nothing happened. Then, the light on the reader flickered from red to dead, going completely dark. Inside the door, he heard a hesitant click, like a latch considering its options. "Come on," he whispered. Another surge rolled through the building. Somewhere distant, a relay thumped. The lock finally gave. The handle turned under his hand. When he pushed, the seal broke with a soft, reluctant sigh. Air rushed out, striking his face with a cold so sharp it felt like stepping into a walk-in freezer. Under the chill rode the familiar antiseptic scent, and something else now, metallic and faintly sweet, like pennies left in the rain. He stepped across the threshold. For a moment, the room ahead stuttered between shadows as the emergency lights tried to decide how bright they wanted to be. Then, a strip along the ceiling stabilized into a steady, sterile glow. The first thing he saw was metal. Rows of server racks lined the left wall, black and humming. Cables braided like vines. Their small indicator lights blinked in organized patterns, a private constellation. To the right, along the far wall, stood a bank of gray cabinets with their doors closed, each labeled with vague stickers. Power, Inv, audio. The hum he'd heard for weeks wasn't just one machine. It was dozens, layered. He moved deeper in. The floor under his shoes shifted from carpet to a rigid, perforated surface that let cold air rise through it. His breath fogged faintly. At the back of the room, beyond the last row of racks, something broke the symmetry. A section of wall that wasn't quite right. The paint didn't match. The seam where it met the ceiling was too clean. He walked toward it, hand trailing along the side of a server cabinet. When he reached the wall, he pressed his fingers against it. The surface gave slightly under his touch. Not solid drywall. A panel. Along the edge, he spotted 3 recessed latches, flush with the finish. He flipped them in turn. Each one clicked with a soft mechanical reluctance. The panel swung out a few inches, releasing a breath of air that was colder than the rest of the room, with a sharp tang of antiseptic and something coppery underneath. Behind it, sound softened abruptly, like he'd opened a door inside a pillow. He pulled the panel wider and stepped through. The space beyond felt like a different world. No windows, no racks, no cabinets, just a windowless room. Narrower than it was long. The walls lined with soundproof foam cut into repeating triangles that swallowed his footsteps and the distant storm. On one side, 4 narrow cots sat in a row, each with a folded blanket at the foot, plastic-wrapped pillows stacked at the head. Beside them, clear water jugs and a crate of individually wrapped energy bars. A portable IV stand leaned against the wall, unused but ready. On the opposite wall, a whiteboard was bolted in place, its surface filled with names, arrows, and dates. Some names were crossed out, replaced with new ones in different handwriting. Besides certain dates, small symbols, a check mark, a question mark, a small drawn X. Near the board, someone had taped a printed document eye level. The heading read, Non-Disclosure and Confidential Testimony Agreement. Below that, dense paragraphs of legal text. At the bottom, highlighted in yellow, a line. Violation of this agreement may result in legal and financial penalties. He stepped closer. At the very bottom of the wall, strips of paper had been taped in a haphazard collage. Each bore a single first name in large letters, written in different hands. He turned. In the center of the room, a single chair sat under a small cluster of lights mounted on a rail. Around it, a compact camera array, 3 lenses on adjustable arms, pointed from different angles. A boom mic hung overhead, like a question mark frozen midair. Tripods leaned folded in the corner. On a rolling cart beside the chair, neat stacks of white envelopes were banded together with rubber ties. Each one was labeled with a date and the word stipend. Beside the envelopes, a locked metal cabinet bore another label, Testimony Records, Do Not Remove. A ring of keys lay on top, as if someone had needed them often enough to stop putting them away. On the shelf above, forms were stacked. Consent to testimonial, confidential arbitration, repeated in several languages across different versions. Some pages were warped at the edges from damp. He could see blurred signatures bleeding through. Near his feet, something small and white caught his eye. A paper bracelet, the disposable kind hospitals clip around wrists. It lay discarded, the printed text worn into illegibility, except for a few digits and a barcode smear. A faint streak of blue dye stained the floor beside it. He followed the stain with his eyes to the corner, where a compact fridge hummed quietly. Inside, through the clear door, he saw rows of energy drinks, water vials, and several boxes of insulin pens. The door handle was smudged with fingerprints. Someone with a condition that couldn't be ignored had been living out of this room, or at least passing time in it longer than a simple interview would require. On the small table next to the nearest cot, a cheap spiral notebook lay open. The top page was curled, but the writing was familiar. The same cramped, careful letters he'd seen on the word water. He stepped closer and read the first line. They said I'd be safe if I stayed here. Below it, shorter fragments. They don't want me to talk to anyone else. They say it's better this way. No windows, no phone. His throat tightened. This wasn't just a room for talking. It was a place for keeping people between worlds, between company and court, between safety and disappearance. His mind raced through possibilities. Maybe they were hiding witnesses from those who'd hurt them. Maybe they were hiding those same witnesses from the law, shaping their stories in a sealed space where no one could see. The moral ground under his feet shifted, unstable. Behind him, the door panel he'd come through clicked softly, as if reminding him he wasn't alone in the building. He was still staring at the notebook when he heard the faintest sound, a lock resetting itself. Metal finding metal. The hair on his arms lifted. Somewhere on the other side of the wall, human hands were moving. He didn't have long to sit with that realization. The click he'd heard wasn't in his head. It came again, sharper this time. The sound of a lock cycling on the outer door. The hum in the server room rose a notch, like the building tensing. Desmond's instinct was immediate and simple. Move. He stepped away from the notebook and back toward the soundproof panel, easing it open just enough to see through the crack. A figure stood in the server room, half turned away, shaking rainwater off a dark jacket. No uniform, no company logo. Plain clothes, neat but forgettable.
A badge clip flashed briefly inside the jacket when the man reached up to smooth his hair.
He shouldn't have been there. Not at this hour. Not in that room. The man turned and froze.
For a beat, they just stared at each other. Desmond in the shadow of the panel, the stranger framed by blinking server lights. Surprise flared across the man's face, quickly smoothed into something else. Calculation.
"You're not supposed to be in here," the man said finally.
His tone tried for casual, but the edges were sharp.
Desmond stepped out fully now. No point hiding. "Door was open," he said. "Storm knocked the system out. I was checking for leaks." The man's eyes flicked past him toward the hidden room, taking in the open panel, the wash of colder air, the faint outline of cots inside. Whatever script he'd brought with him tonight had to adjust on the fly. "This is a controlled environment," the man said, slipping into a practiced cadence. "For safety. For people involved in sensitive legal matters. You can't be in here. You could compromise. Protections we've put in place." "Whose safety?" Desmond asked. The question landed heavier than its few syllables. The man hesitated, then reached inside his jacket and produced a small leather wallet. He flipped it open just enough for Desmond to glimpse a laminated ID and some kind of security credential. No name stuck in his mind, only the impression of official lettering. "Internal compliance," the man said. "We operate on behalf of several tenants. We handle high-risk testimonies here so people don't get intimidated before they speak. That's all this is, a safe room. Temporary accommodations." The words were polished, the story ready, but his eyes kept darting to the notebooks, the chair, the envelopes. "So why hide it?" Desmond said. "Why the ghost badge, the blacked-out cameras, the NDAs plastered on the wall like warnings?" The man's jaw tightened. "You're a janitor," he said. "You don't understand the legal exposure involved. There are liability issues, privacy concerns. People here have signed agreements. You being in this space, that's a breach." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "Look, nobody wants trouble. You seem more than you were supposed to, but that doesn't mean it has to go anywhere. Take a breath. We can make this clean." From his pocket, he pulled a white envelope, thick enough to change shape when he pinched it. He set it gently on the edge of the nearest server cabinet, between them like a small, heavy boundary. "Walk away," he said. "You forget this room. You keep your job, maybe even get moved to a better shift. Nothing illegal here, just delicate matters. People who need privacy. Let the system handle it." Desmond's eyes dropped to the envelope, then to the camera bubble in the corner. Its red light was dark. Whatever happened in this room would live or die on memories. "What system?" he asked. "The one that runs interviews in secret rooms and keeps people here overnight without windows. The one that makes them write for water." The man's gaze flicked to the hidden room again. "They consented," he said. "They signed. Sometimes witnesses need protection from themselves, from bad decisions. We keep them focused. It's better than sending them home where someone might pressure them, or worse." He pointed toward the testimony chair. 72 hours tops, then they go, stipends in hand. We help them tell their story the right way. If you bring cops into this, you'll scare people off. Cases collapse. Predators walk. It was a clever argument. If Desmond bought it, walking away became an act of mercy. Silence dressed up as protection, but details snagged on his mind. The overriding time code he'd spotted on the camera rig, set to erase footage every 3 days. The insulin in the fridge, suggesting stays longer than any interview should demand. The note asking for water. His hand moved almost on its own. While the man talked, he took his phone from his pocket, thumb swiping to the camera. He held it low, angling the lens toward the room. The man noticed. "Don't," he said sharply. "No recordings. That's..." Desmond hit the shutter. Once, twice. The muffled clicks sounded loud in the padded air. He didn't even need perfect shots, just enough to prove this place existed. "Those photos are company property now," the man said. "You took them on company time, in a restricted space. You send those anywhere, and legal will crush you. Or you can hand me the phone, take that envelope, and we pretend this was a misunderstanding." Somewhere, faint but unmistakable, a soft, racking cough drifted through the room. Both men turned. The sound hadn't come from the cots. It came from above, from a small metal grill high on the wall, part of the ventilation system. Behind the slats, 2 eyes stared back, wide, rimmed with red, catching the cold light.
For a moment, the world narrowed to that gaze. Fear, exhaustion, and something like apology flickered there. The man in the jacket reacted first. "Back away from the panel," he snapped, stepping between Desmond and the hidden room. "You're upsetting our client. You need to leave. Now."
Client. That was one word for someone who had to cough through a vent to be heard. The stakes sharpened hard and fast. If Desmond left now, the cameras would come back online in minutes. The overriding cycle would kick in. The person behind that grill would go back to being a ghost in the building's walls. If he stayed, if he escalated, he'd be stepping into a fight he couldn't step back out of. Jobs, references, maybe more than that, gone. He thought of his old storage room, of headaches and quiet retaliation, of the promise he made to himself in the years since. Never walk past danger and pretend it wasn't there. He stepped around the man instead of back, moving toward the server room door. "I heard someone," he said. "I saw your room. I saw your notes about keeping them from talking to anyone else. I'm not qualified to judge what this is, but I know I'm not the one who should be deciding if it's okay." He pulled his phone up, not to photograph now, but to dial. Not his supervisor, not the building manager. The man's expression shifted from negotiation to alarm. "Hang up," he said, reaching out. "You're making a mistake. You don't understand the implications." Desmond took 2 quick steps back, putting a server rack between them, and lifted the phone to his ear. 911, he said clearly when the operator answered. "I'm in the Tower West building on 8th, 6th floor, North Corridor. I found an unregistered room where they're holding someone. No windows. They may need medical attention." The man lunged, grabbing for the phone. Desmond twisted away, the corded hum of the servers wrapping their brief struggle in mechanical noise. "I said hang up," the man hissed. Desmond met his eyes, voice steady, loud enough for the operator to hear. "I am being obstructed," he said, "by someone claiming to be internal compliance. Please send officers and an ambulance. I'll meet them in the lobby." The man's grip tightened, then loosened as sirens, faint but rising, began to thread through the storm outside. For the first time that night, Desmond felt the building shift in his favor. The lobby felt smaller with uniforms in it. Rain-soaked officers moved through security like they'd rehearsed this building 100 times. Desmond stood by the reception desk, heart thudding, as he repeated what he'd told the dispatcher. Unregistered room, no windows, someone inside asking for water. Upstairs, locks cascaded open as access overrides rippled through the system. Fire doors that never moved at night yawned wide. Alarms on 6 briefly wailed, then cut, replaced by clipped radio chatter. When they reached the gray door, it didn't resist. The brass key turned once more. One locked door had hidden a compromise dressed up as care, and forced a quiet man to decide who he really was. If this story moved you, share what moral courage looks like to you in the comments. And if you want more true stories of ordinary people facing impossible choices, subscribe and let the next video keep you company.